Then we see this on the way down. Look at where the elbows are, very flared, very flared. And as you can probably see from the side now, this is not the posture I started in. It is not the place where I want to be. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the elitefts YouTube channel. Today we are going to be going over the barbell overhead press. So Noah and I were just chatting before we were filming this, and I was under the impression that we'd filmed this video when we hadn't. And considering I'm someone who espouses the benefits of overhead work a lot, it kind of seems like we probably should have made this video already, so apologies. So the goal of this video is going to be to troubleshoot most of the issues that we see relating to barbell overhead pressing in lifters, right? Now, just kind of a word of warning or an assumption that we're making here is that you already have the prerequisite shoulder mobility to overhead press. What we're talking about here is like the technical elements of the overhead press. If you don't have full overhead mobility, meaning that you can't get your arm to vertical, like a locked out position, without going into extension, whether it's up in the ribs, which is usually the case, or even into anterior tilt, then you're going to need to first work on your overhead mobility, which is usually like your internal rotators, your pecs and your lats, that type of thing, because all of what we're going to talk about, you won't really be able to access if we're being limited by that mobility restriction. But assuming you're in a position where we can do this, now we're going to look at what people get wrong with their overhead pressing, and with the goal of making it more approachable and feeling better. But one other little caveat here, I know this sounds like there's a lot. We're talking about overhead pressing for kind of the global benefits of pressing overhead, which for me are primarily going to be about your posture, your bracing, your core and your upper back strength, your shoulder stability, not so much maximal overhead performance. So if you're like a pro strongman, for example, or someone who has to press maximal load overhead, how we're going to approach the overhead press here isn't probably going to be exactly what you would do to achieve that end goal, which is move the max weight from A to B, but it might be a way that you approach your overhead pressing in, say, your off season, to execute it in a way that kind of beats you up a little bit less and feels, should we say, a bit more natural to perform. So the first thing that I want to go over is basically just let's go over grip width first, because this is a common place where people go wrong. Now, what we ideally want, if we're just taking someone who's not really overhead pressed before or doesn't really have a set routine with it, is going for a grip width that's just outside shoulder width. And the reason for that is, basically, when it comes to lifting heavy things and getting the posture in good alignment, we kind of like straight lines. So the more of those that we can have, the better. So if I take a just outside shoulder width grip, but for me, I can basically use a marker on my thumbnail to kind of see how far I am from the smooth to do that. What we want to do is use a grip width that allows us to get a forearm position in the bottom position that is roughly vertical. A slight outward angle is fine, okay? But what we very commonly see is, and this is quite often related to the fact that they're struggling with shoulder mobility, they can't get the elbow scooped forward enough. We'll see people going out pretty wide, like so, and then they're very flared out in the bottom position here, which isn't necessarily a terrible position to be in, but it does make it a little bit more unstable and a little bit more difficult in the lockout position. So first off, set your shoulder, your grip, just outside shoulder width grip, with the goal of getting that forearm stacked and vertical in the bottom position. Now, to achieve that vertical forearm, we're going to need to get the elbow in the correct position. Now, if we're looking at the setup from the side, what we're also looking for then is that forearm to be either vertical or slightly angled back in space. And the reason for that is, think about where we want the bar to go in our overhead press. Okay, let's say we're here. The bar path of an overhead press is up and very slightly back. You know, it kind of finishes centered over your crown of your head here. So there's a slight backward curve. So where most people are starting is here. So what do you think is going to happen to the bar path when you go and push with that kind of setup there? Obviously the bar wants to go up and out in front of you, which often then, as soon as that bar comes out in front, we end up leaning back to try and compensate and even things out. So we want to be able to get the elbow scooped forward and under, so we can have either vertical forearm or slightly angled back forearm at the bottom, which is also what allows us to get the wrist stacked. Because a really super common thing we see here with the overhead press, and again, this is why people will struggle to do it regularly or do it heavy, they'll be in the bottom position and their wrists will be like this. Okay, so it'll be very angled back and cocked back like that. Not only is that really bad for force transfer, but the reason that this is usually happening is because if your elbows are too wide and not tucked forward enough, the wrist kind of has to cock back to get the bar stacked directly over the elbow. We see the exact same thing on the bench press, okay? So you come down on the bench press, your elbows are too flared out here, which means the wrist is not stacked, it's lower down your body than the bar. So then the wrist has to cock back to try and get the center of mass over the bar, over the elbow. Whereas on that bench press, if we were more tucked and we got that forearm straighter, that would also allow the wrist to be in the correct position. So a lot of the time what we're seeing up top here from the wrist being out of position is actually coming from down here. So we've got our grip width just wider than our shoulder. And now we're gonna basically act like we're gonna try and touch our elbows together in front of us. So we're here, the knuckles are up, and if I just squeeze these in and forward as hard as humanly possible, it's pretty much always going to put you in the correct position, right? So in this position now, I can keep the wrist straight, the knuckles are pointed up to the ceiling. Now, also in this position, as we can probably see from the side, we do not want to be in a really heavily retracted position. So if I go back here and I squeeze back akin to what a lot of people do on a bench press, obviously I have this tiny little problem now where if I want to press up, my chin is in the way. And a lot of the time what we'll see then here is people will retract because we think that's the position that's best for the shoulders. But because of where that then puts the bar, we have to excessively lean back to make sure that we don't obviously get in the way. Now, if you haven't already, go back and watch the video we did on dips and chin-ups. Noah can do his thing and put the link there. We want to approach setting the upper back in the exact same way here on the overhead press, which means have the collarbones as wide as you can and have the neck as long as you can. Because then if we're here and we're broad, that means we can achieve this front rack position with the bar being slightly out in front of us. We don't have to move the head around the bar to get out of the way of it. Whereas if I'm here in this fully retracted position, obviously now I have to move the head back to get out of the way and then bring it forward, when in reality with a well-executed military press, you don't really have to move your head or your upper body at all. You can start here with the bar slightly out in front, and then there'll just be a very slight forward shift of the whole body together then as it gets back over your center of mass. So let's just go over that again. So grip for now, just, you know, if you're struggling with your setup, you don't know what's best for you, go just outside shoulder width. When you go to unrack, scoop the elbows forward and in as hard as you can. So this is me maximally tucking and squeezing in. And then when you're about to set up for your press, the neck needs to be long, which means shoulders down and the collarbones as wide as possible. This allows us now to have a nice straight line up into the bar, pushing the bar where we want, which is up and back. The bar is clear of your head and your shoulders are in a position where now, because we're not retracted or elevated, they can move nice and freely through the range of motion that we need. Whereas if we were squeezed back here and elevated, there's nowhere for them to go. Okay. So for a lot of people, that's going to eliminate a lot of the issues with like shoulder and elbow strain with the front rack position. Now remember, this is for a military press. So we're not looking for any leg drive or anything like that. If you want to start doing push presses and things like that, that changes the rack position very much so. General rule of thumb, for a military press or a strict press, we want the forearm to be, say at 6 o'clock, maybe 7 o'clock to get that slight backward angle where you want it to go. If you're doing a push press where we would want the bar across the front rack position on the front delts, then we're probably looking for more like 8 o'clock so that the bar can more unload onto the body. If we were doing something like a jerk, power jerk, split jerk, whatever, that then is where we would want that upper arm to be up at like 9 o'clock so that the bar can fully unload onto the front rack position. Basically, the idea is that as you go through those variations, you become more and more dependent on leg drive, which means you want more and more of the bar weight actually resting on your body. Okay, now, the next thing that we have to tackle very commonly with the overhead press is the extension posture. So being arched up like this, okay? This will commonly result in people saying that like overhead pressing aggravates their lower back. They get pain, discomfort, a lot of stiffness in the next day. Now, the overhead press is probably the single best exercise for ingraining your ability to root into the floor and maintain a neutral posture compared to any other exercise. Now, if you don't know what I mean when I say root or ground into the floor, again, we've done a video on that for you. Noah can do his thing and put that link up. But basically, we're talking about the ability of us to make contact with the floor and actively pull ourselves into the floor. Because obviously, when we're doing an overhead press, right, this is our load that we're moving. Think about how far that load is away from your anchor point, which is your feet. There is no other lift where the load that you're supporting is further away from your anchor point than during an overhead press, right? So this is going to be very unstable and very challenging, both on your ability to ground and root down and your ability to keep the ribs down. Why? Because as we press up, the lats are going to lengthen, and as the lats lengthen, the attachment down here is going to want to pull your ribs up, which is why if you don't have enough mobility in your lats, you can't lock out overhead without ending up here, right? So as you're pressing up into this position, the bar's getting less stable and everything is trying to pull your ribs up. So you've got to root down harder and you've got to pin the ribs down harder and harder then as that weight goes up overhead, which is why it's so damn challenging. We all get humbled by it, right? So another common fault that we'll see in the military press that makes this really difficult is the knees being locked back. Now, if you think that, let's say you're in an example here, like someone was going to push you or you're going to take a hit in football, or even like you're riding a bus or something and it's really unstable. If you're stood there with your knees locked straight, you don't really have any means of shifting your balance around and absorbing any kind of deviations in balance point, right? You have nothing to work with. It's also going to be incredibly difficult to actively pull yourself down into the ground then. Whereas if we just soften the knee very slightly, first off, that makes it way easier to get the pelvis into neutral, but now we have a little bit of slack in the joints where we can actively pull down into the floor. Now I can move my center of mass around and physically grip the floor way better, which means as that bar goes up overhead and I kind of need to shift my balance a little bit more forward, I'm going to be a lot more stable doing that. So what that means is then the whole time that we're performing our military press, there should be a very slight bend in the knee and it should be pulling down into the floor at all times. So again, this would be typically what we'd see in an overhead press, right? So the knees now are extended, so the legs are straight. The wrists will usually be kind of winged back behind the bar and the wrist would be cocked back here. So it'd be like this. And as soon as I get overhead here and I have to move forward under it, my knees being extended means I don't really have a lot of play to work with here. Like I have to kind of go into anterior pelvic tilt to get to get the hips behind me to kind of balance all of this out. Whereas what we would like to see is obviously the elbows tucked, the wrist straight. Now the knees go soft. We pull down into the floor and now we keep pulling into the floor as we press up. Now my whole body can just shift very slightly forward and I'm able to keep my pelvis neutral, my sternum can stay down. I don't end up being here as I did in the previous iteration there. So we've got grip width sorted, upper back setup sorted, wide as possible. And then we've got the hips down sorted, okay? Now, the other place where people very commonly go wrong is the eccentric phase. Now, in just about every lift that we do, concentric and eccentric should be a mirror image of each other. Like if you were to take a video of your eccentric and concentric phase on your squat, they should pretty much look the same. Like if you pause them at the midpoint, it should look the same. The overhead press is no different. But what we'll really commonly see here is, even if we're setting up well, so we're here, say that this individual does the initial setup pretty well, they're all tucked and everything like that. We press up, then we see this on the way down. Look at where the elbows are, very flared, very flared. What's the problem with this is like, well, at some point my head is going to be in the way. So I either have to do this and lean back to get out of the way of it, and then I end up here. And as you can probably see from the side now, this is not the posture I started in, it is not the place where I want to be. The other thing that happens then if we do that, let's say I'm too flared and I just kind of shimmy my way back underneath it. When I get to the bottom position, usually the elbows will be too flared and back behind the bar. So we'll end up in this kind of position where a lot of people are starting, which puts loads of pressure on the shoulder joint. Just holding this bar here is difficult right now, right? So what should be happening is a mirror image of what happens on the way up. So we start tucked. As we press during phase one, and we can talk about that in a second, phase one, the elbows stay pretty tucked in, and then phase two, they flare out. So now at the top, my elbows, if you could see them, are pointing straight out to the side. So they've rotated out on the way up because they need to, which means during the first half of the way down, they should tuck in. So what I want you to think about on the way down is I'm grabbing the bar up top now. I'm going to actively twist my elbows like I'm trying to point them at the camera, like I'm trying to point them at Noah. And now as I bring them down, watch where the elbows go. They rotate in. And as they rotate in, the bar will also naturally then come down in front of me. And if we do this well, I should end up in pretty much the same position that I started in, because that's what the eccentric phase should do. It should return you back to whatever the start position was. So, and this is the same for your bench press and any other presses that you do, right? As the arm goes away from the body, there's going to be a rotation out. So that now the elbow is going to be pointing straight out to your side, which means on the way down, we need to correct that. So we're going to think twist the upper arm in like that. And as you bring it down, that elbow will come across the body and we'll end up in that same position here that we wanted to start in. So really, this whole tucking in maneuver is going on the entire time, because even as those elbows are flaring out as I press up, I don't really want to think too much about actively flaring them, because then you'll probably overdo it. And on the way down, I'm definitely doing it because I need them to come forward to finish in the same position that they started in, so I can go into my next rep or just load all the proper musculature on the way down. So another very common fault is the start position. You know, this will be debated, I'm sure, but the question is, what is the appropriate start position of a military press? I know that sounds a little bit dumb, but some people will say like it has to start on your chest, or it has to start below your chin, or you know, some other arbitrary measurement that they're going to use there. But in reality, your start position is going to be determined by the relationship that's going on here. Now, we kind of discussed this on the lat pull down video that we did, and again, Noah can do his thing and put that one up, where the bottom position of your lat pull down is not as low as you can pull it. It's as low as you can pull whilst keeping the forearm vertical there. Why? Because any movement after that point is this, which is not a very efficient way to train your lats, I assure you. But we get the same issue here. If this is the lowest position that I can maintain a vertical forearm, if I were to start my overhead press in a lower position than this, then the forearm is going to be angled out in front, which we've already kind of discussed is not a good place to start. Not only does the force want to go out there, but now your rotator cuff and a whole bunch of other muscles that shouldn't be doing the work are doing an awful lot of work. So your start position relative to your body, your chin, your head, whatever, is going to be determined by how long you are here relative to how long you are here. So let's look at what that looks like on me. So now if we look at this from the side, if I were to go with the arbitrary, like military press has to start on your chest, this is where I would have to be. So right now, my elbows are behind the bar. For me to get the elbows under the bar has to leave my chest. So if I supposedly have to start here, I either have to have the elbows back, or I might have to try and like jockey my chest up and kind of cheat my chest to a higher position so I can get stuck. But now look at how much extension I'm in. So that's what happens if I try to start in that position. So if we look at this from the top down, I go through that eccentric phase in the way that I just described. So the elbows will twist in and forward. I bring the bar down, and I'm gonna do that to the point at which I can just about keep the forearms vertical, which for me is about there. If I start going any lower than that, the elbows will start working their way back. So that would be my start position, okay? Which you can see on the video, I don't know, is whatever amount underneath my chin, right? Now, for someone else, let's say they're very long in the forearm, but short in the upper arm, that position is going to be higher in space, because relative here, this same arm alignment will put the hand higher up. So maybe for them, you know, it's going to be level with their lower lip, or it might be on their chest if they're the other way around and very short here and very long here. So that's a very simple test for you if you're a little bit concerned about this. You can go jump on a lat pull down, put a light weight on it, start at the top, twist the elbows in, basically do everything that we discussed on that lat pull down video, pull down, kind of watch a video from the side or whatever, wherever that height is, where you can't pull with your lats anymore, and you just end up doing this, that is your start position for your military press. It's that simple. Now, again, remember that's going to be different if you're push pressing, whatever else, but for strict press, that is going to be your start position. So let's just kind of mix all of that together and put it together into like one perfect rep, right? No pressure. So we're going to have the grip just outside shoulder width. And as I set up here, the goal is going to be get the elbows tucked as far forward as we can, narrow as we can, and have the collarbones in the upper back as wide as possible. So we're here. So the elbows are squeezed in, the wrists are straight, the knuckles are up, upper back is wide. So from here, the elbows will stay tucked until I get to about forehead level. And then naturally, they should start to rotate out as I go into what would be phase 2. And then in the top position, I'm here. The knuckles are still pointing up to the ceiling. My knees are still bent. I'm actively pulling down into the floor, and I'm keeping my head as tall as possible. Then on the eccentric phase, to initiate it, I'm going to twist the elbows in and forward. And as I bring it down, because of that elbow rotation, it's naturally going to come down in front. And then they're going to be about as tucked as they're going to be till I get to about forehead level, and then I bring it down to the absolute lowest point that I can without my elbows winging back behind the bar. That's your like stereotypical perfect military press rep, okay? Now, if you're struggling to kind of ingrain this at first, my first suggestion would be to first off try something like a cervicus press. Okay, now the reason for that is it does make it harder in many ways, but we don't have to worry about the active rooting down into the floor quite so much, and it gives you less margin for error. What I mean by that is because you're sat on the floor with your legs out straight, if you overshoot and you press too far back, say you've got a lot of shoulder mobility, well then your weight goes back. If you don't keep the ribs down, then you end up arching and your weight also goes back. So it basically punishes you more for the mistakes, because what we need to be focusing on, remember, is kind of think of it in two opposing halves. The bar and your arms, everything's going that way. From the armpit down, everything is pushing or pulling down. So as the arms do this, the sternum and the abs are pulling the rib cage, being pulled down into your hips. Then from the hips and the feet, we're actively pulling the feet down into the floor. And when you do that very well, you'll be rock solid as that bar goes up overhead, and we won't see all of this shifting back and forth that we would normally see with an overhead press, okay? So your checklist would be feet gripping, rooting down into the floor. As you do that, the pelvis should come into neutral, sternum depressed, not flared up, collarbones wide, and then that should be maintained the entire time. So you're constantly as wide as you can in the back. Yes, there'll be a little bit of elevation when you get to the top, but that's fine. You don't need to actively encourage that. But all of this should stay pulled down into the floor. Now, when you do that, your military press is gonna get a lot harder, okay? Because the whole reason that we end up arching back, and we can see this from the side, is that when we start going into that leant back position, like here, the reason that helps get the bar moving in this bottom third is because it allows you to bring the pec minors into it, right? Like this kind of turns it into like a pseudo standing incline press. It allows you to bring pec minors into the bottom position a bit more, gives you a little bit more pressing power. But where does that end? You know, like, are you doing overhead press for your pec minors? Probably not. What's that doing in terms of compressive stress on your lower back? Probably not great. At the end of the day, this is why the strict press got taken out of the Olympics, because it kind of became like this weird who can limbo with the heaviest weight kind of contest. So if we're looking at the military press in this context, for the benefits of yes, improving pressing strength, shoulder strength, whatever, but primarily improving your postural strength, your bracing, your grounding, your upper back strength, your shoulder stability. Well, then the main goal of your military press should be to make this segment from kind of the armpit down. You want that to be like a block of concrete. You want that locked in place, right? And yes, that's going to limit the load that you can do. But if you're someone who is after maximal front delt hypertrophy, for example, let's say that's your goal, then this probably isn't your exercise. I mean, it's great, but if you want maximal hypertrophy, something like an incline press, even 30 degrees, will give you as much activation and loading for that front delt, but there's going to be way more load involved. You're going to be able to go probably closer to failure without something postural giving way, and you're probably going to be able to tolerate more of it. It's less neurologically demanding because lying down is less neurologically demanding, right? So we look at it from a pure hypertrophy standpoint, probably not the best, right? Go do something like that, maybe go do dips instead. But the reason that I think this should be in most people's program is for the secondary benefits, okay? Which is all of that I've listed, but also the fact that there is definitely something to be said for shoulder health by just maintaining the ability to do this, by having that range of motion in your repertoire, even if you don't need to use it in whatever you compete in, whatever. Trust me, if you don't, then eventually then your shoulders are going to let you know. So, super quick recap, one more time, just so we kind of get this locked away. And then we can all overhead press feeling healthier and happier, I hope. Probably not with more weight though, sorry. So, just outside shoulder width. Elbows tuck and squeeze in and forward. Notice how I'm using a thumbless grip. I do that on everything, so it's a little bit of a habit, but for those of you who are struggling with shoulder rotation here, going to a thumbless grip is a cheating way of getting you a little bit more shoulder rotation here. So if you're kind of like forcing it on the end range or you're not even quite able to get there, thumb over the bar allows you to get into a slightly more rotated position. I'm not going to talk about the other benefits, but there are many benefits to a thumbless grip, but that's that as an aside. So just outside shoulder width grip, elbows rotate in and forward as much as I can, collarbones wide, neck long. Stance for most is going to be about shoulder width. I'll talk about that in a second. Knuckles are up. Right, so now pelvis neutral, legs, feet pulling into the floor, sternum pressed down, elbows stay tucked, neck stays long. Once I'm past the forehead, the elbows will naturally rotate out. We lock out with the elbows pointing directly out to the side, the knuckles up and the arm vertical. My knees are still soft. I'm still rooting into the floor. To initiate the eccentric phase, then the elbows twist in, like I'm trying to snap the bar between my hands. The bar naturally then curves forward in front of me, so I don't have to move. And we finish in the lowest possible position that I can keep my forearms stacked and not go into that rotated back position. Now, I mentioned stance there very quickly, so we'll just go over that before you all are bored to death of overhead press. For most people, about shoulder width is going to give you the best blend of stability, but not allowing you to cheat. And what I mean by that is, if I go very wide here, I have more ability to lean back and turn this into a standing incline press, okay? If I go super narrow, not only is my base of support obviously very small now, which then means I'm gonna fall back much earlier in that movement. Now, if we're trying to overhead press reasonably heavy, this probably isn't a good place to be just because I'm so unstable. But I don't really want to be out here because that's going to facilitate me cheating more, inverted commas, right? So for most, being about shoulder width is going to give you the best blend of enough support, a big enough base of support that you're going to be able to press some reasonable loads, but it's not going to facilitate this massively arched back posture, which we're trying to avoid anyway. So I sincerely hope that that's helpful in helping you clean up your military press and make it feel a little bit better for you. As always, thank you for supporting Elite FTS. Thank you for supporting the YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.